following program is brought to you in living color.
For those
wanted to call and say thank you so much for such a great job you do on Trek World channel. I've been watching since you started the channel, and as someone who has seen every episode of the original series and TNG probably 30 times each, I've learned so much from your channel about the backstory of Star Trek and how it was made and the drama between the creators and the actors. I felt like I knew a lot of this stuff, but watching your channel just made me realize I literally knew nothing about my favorite series of all time. So thank you so much. Love your channel, and I hope you continue to preserve all this great information for posterity online. Thank you.
For those of you who've joined us online, we are actually live streaming on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and I think possibly, I don't even remember. Terrible. Okay, so what we're going to do today, for those of you who are not all that familiar with the drama that is the lawsuits between Heritage and the buyers of the auctioned storage unit that ended up with physical custody and ownership of the 33-inch model, there's been some real interesting turns that we're going to talk about. I'm going to pull up an amended complaint in a few minutes and step us through parts of it that explains the additional charges, really, although it's a civil case, not really charges, the additional things that they are now suing for damages for. And it begins to show a very, very complicated relationship between Roddenberry, Heritage, and the lawyers, basically, for Dustin and Jason. And so we're going to go over that a little bit. Now, for those of you who are not aware, I'm going to pop up something here on the screen. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it here, but for those who are not aware, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got here. On or about November 2nd of 2023, Heritage was hired by React to authenticate, appraise, promote, and sell the Star Trek model by its online auction. Heritage proposed consignment, making itself an agent and fiduciary to React and Rivas. 2. Heritage executive Joe Magdalena enters into the deal behind the scenes. He recognized the value of the model to Star Trek franchise owner Roddenberry Entertainment and set out to enhance his own prestige to Roddenberry Entertainment. These are all allegations, remember. While Magdalena self-dealt with Rod, React and Rivas Heritage advisor Brian Chen was told to specifically talk the two plaintiffs down in their expectations for what they're going to get for the model. What else? And also told them to inform Dustin and Jason that Roddenberry had a strong claim and a powerful legal team, and therefore pushed them to accept a $500,000 finder's fee but they did not tell Heritage, because it actually reads here, says, to accept a finder's fee without revealing Heritage's true assessment. Rivas had clear title and the model was well worth in excess of $1 million. So basically, they reached out, they allegedly instructed Brian, said, you need to talk them down, tell them that there's a legal thing that's going to keep them in court forever, which is kind of ironic compared to what we ended up being, and that, take this deal because they're not getting anything better. Excuse me. So after that, Magdalena turned it over to Heritage attorneys to write up because they needed to change the contract. Of course, the contract was related specifically to signed auctions.
Closer, Timmy.
Heritage attorneys knew they could not ethically nor legally modify the agency assessment without making sure the plaintiffs obtained independent service. Heritage counsel instead assigned a non-lawyer Mickey Hale as the front man to avoid directly and personally violating any of Texas or California's ethical rules on behalf of then Haley told Riak and Rivas our legal team was negotiating with Roddenberry and Riak on their behalf and sent a release, which she presented being from REI, stating, "We just both sent you and Jason separate email documents for you to read." So this is the first of actual leases or releases. Please look for yours and Jason's alert. Yeah, they did. These and other ethical instances of ethical violation, fraud, and self-dealing mean that settlement and release is not already void under California and Texas law, while also violating the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act. I'm not going to go there. That we're not really qualified to determine what's, once we get away from ownership, it's really going to depend on whatever the judge and the jury says. This is a jury case. To this point, Heritage remained silent, other than issuing public boasts of being the hero, knew they could have easily sold it for $1 million, if not more, as it is priceless, all the while failing to pay even the $500,000 that were promised in their original release. Thus, and this is Riak and Rita says, "We have no dispute with Roddenberry. It is Heritage who acted unethically and illegally to its principal's detriment. I propose a confidential mediation while the safe harbor period on this letter runs. If this is not agreeable, we will file suit in Los Angeles Superior Court forthwith." Well, we know what happened. They ended up filing a suit because Heritage did not respond to a request for arbitration. And then, of course, but it was ironic that in Heritage's countersuit back, they said that they had asked for arbitration, and Jason and Dustin and Jason didn't respond back. So who really, I know I've seen the legal paperwork, all this stuff here on the Jason side. I'll have to say a couple of things to explain to folks in case you're wondering where this information is coming from. All of this is publicly available information in the California District Court in Los Angeles. Every time there is a modification done to any one of the documents that has been assigned to the legal case, I go out to that website and I pay, just like anybody else, to download that public document in order to either learn something or to go on here. You may be wondering, how do I know when anything's been changing? Well, it isn't a secret to almost everybody now. I've been working pretty closely with the lawyers and with Dustin and Jason since not long after the beginning of how this started. They have very, very limited impartial people that they could avail themselves to when dealing with this, because just about everybody who knew anything about the model and what happened is already a vested interest, unfortunately, because of the way that Heritage did this. We all saw the photographs that were published on April 18th that showed the entire authentication team. We had Star Trek people, we had a toy people, and all of those people. And when we saw that in mid-April, I was tickled to death because it's like, oh, this is incredible because we got our very best people on here. And they really do. You've got, Gary and Denise and Mike and Doug. I practically worship the ground these guys walk on. I feel very confident in their opinions. And so authentication was without a hitch. What none of those people knew was the deal already fallen apart by the time they even showed up on April 1st to have that meeting. And because that meeting literally wrote every known person, there was no one that anybody could reach out to on the other side that was going to be impartial or could be at least accepted at face value. I am by all means not the least bit knowledgeable as any of the people that we've spoken of in a moment here that are part of the authenticators. 100%. And so my limitations on helping anyone who has asked me has been in identifying people in photographs and then listening to the legal complaints, both coming in each way, and then is there anything that I could do? Okay. So earlier videos, you saw I reached out to Susan Sackett with specific questions. I do have the ability to contact several people that have not been involved in this, and I would do that. But I never really told anybody the whole story I was looking for. You'd reach out to somebody and said, "Are you aware? Did you ever see this?" So that's where this information is coming from. I will be doing a video not too long from now. It's a real video and not a live stream, because I do understand the live streams cause a lot of people grief because it's not exactly a friendly format to what you're used to seeing on a documentary or on an informational channel like we have here. But so what I'm going to do now is we're going to go take a look, though, at some of the things here. And I did want to point out that this amended complaint was challenged by Heritage when it was originally submitted. And I'll talk about why they challenged it as we went through this. And there are also some supporting docs that were submitted with it that we will not take a look at today because we want to not be on here till, next Thursday. Heritage challenged that publicizing information that had been added in this piece, the new added allegations about wrongdoing and stuff like that, would be a breach of confidence and could damage multiple people's reputation. The judge did not agree, and the judge approved it, accepted it, and then as soon as I knew that it was now in the public record, I went out and bought it, and I could talk to it. I'd seen it prior to that, but I will not discuss anything that could possibly get in the way of this legal lawsuit on either side. So anyhow, this is where it begins here. So the very first thing it talks into, of course, we're going to blow through pretty quickly, but this was, they found it in a storage locker. No big surprise there. The parties we've identified right now, notice in some of the things that I've highlighted that for the first time, some other information is coming to light. Okay. And the first thing you're going to see is that in addition to they buy and sell storage units, they point out Dustin is a career self-storage entrepreneur, which he is, but he is also a reality TV star as Dusty Rach in the A&E hit series Storage Wars. Dusty has been on, I still call him Dustin. Dustin has been on that show for its last 3 seasons. It is in hiatus. His purchasing of the storage unit with Jason had nothing to do with Storage Wars because it was in hiatus. But he has a career that is built on his reputation and his story. And we all know what kind of story we got now. And then, of course, it talks about, Riak and Rivas were longtime friends who sometimes go into these joint ventures together, just the way it is. And then I do want to pull out here because I want to be very, very clear about Joseph, Magdalena, and Joseph. I am so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. I know everybody's listening to this. Very few will comment that are connected with it, but it's being listened. So I want to take this opportunity to say that I agree, especially with what we're seeing here. This man has an immense talent when it comes to running memorabilia auctions. I mean, he started Profiles in History. He joined Heritage when they bought Profiles in History. And he is probably like the auction area's Steve Jobs. I mean, he just has that gift. And as a result of that, you will see him, obviously in public relations stuff, like when they announced that they had found the Enterprise. But also there was a TV show called Hollywood Treasure that he was involved in. He'd actively been promoting a show like that since all the way back in like 2009 and just not really find the proper connections to get it started until much later. His resume reads like who's who. And I don't think that is alleged from the plaintiff side should cast any doubt on his qualifications or his expertise. That I would probably be comfortable if I found something expensive still going to him, because I think the way this went down in the wrong way for everybody involved. And I also pretty much think that as a result of that, this kind of miscommunication will never happen again, because a lot of people have complained over the years about Heritage Auctions and Joe. And if you've been on the prop forums on the internet, there's a lot of trolls out there that really criticize everything these guys do. But I point out that prior to this lawsuit, no one had ever really taken them to court about something that they believed they could legally win. So I think that a lot of what he's been accused of in the past is circumstantial and could be sour grapes. Maybe I would be upset if I didn't get what I thought my due was going to be based off of this trend. So this whole section you hear, I'm not going to read it all, but it basically goes through what I just said. I mean, his background is very impressive. So a little bit more about him. Magdalena produces and stars in documentary and reality shows for featuring himself finding, authenticating, and dealing in important documents, artifacts, and memorabilia, including Star Trek in its, quote, The Ultimate Auction. Also, Profile in History's 2001 Star Trek memorabilia auction. He also hosts the Hollywood Treasure series. These shows always feature Magdalena and never feature his clients coming to him for professional advice and possible consignment. So the argument here is, and I can see exactly why the series is set up that way, is Joe is coming from the perspective of the find, and where it goes next is the only important story. Dustin comes from the Storage Wars background on TV, which says the story of how you got to the find is just as important as the rest. And where this comes in is that Dustin and Jason were actively told repeatedly not to contact anybody else to ask any questions concerning anything to do with the model, which of course was not legally, and there's no way anybody could force that. But they basically said, do not talk to anybody. And they also were specifically forbidden, allegedly, from attending the meeting that we saw on April 1st. That took all the photographs, the authentication. Dustin and Jason had wanted to be there, and they said, no, we're just going to have, an authentication meeting. It's nothing really special. And then, of course, when the press release came out on the 14th or on the 15th that month, that's when things began to escalate. That's the same one. All right. So I'm not really going to go. Some of the stuff I've highlighted, but in all honesty, I don't want to rehash. So I'm looking for the things that have changed. So I really do have to actually point out some of the things that they are saying Heritage did not reveal to them in other legal documents or emails that have been filed with the court. One of them was, of course, that Heritage really had no basis for believing that Roddenberry's claim of ownership would legally trump anything else. But more importantly, they contacted Roddenberry because they had already believed in their own mind that the stolen model belonged to Roddenberry. But they never had that conversation once with Dustin and Jason, and that might have actually had a completely different outcome as a result of this if they had. They did say point blank, Brian originally said, well, we're going to insure it. Liability insurance right now, because it's in our showroom, we're going to insure it for $800,000. It should well go over $1 million. And then, of course, when the press release came out from Heritage Auctions, Joe was quoted in there saying, I knew this thing would go for millions. So we decided to do the right thing and return it back to its original owner. That press release is still on the Heritage Auctions website. If anyone wants to go look at it, you will see that the way that it's worded is literally Heritage returns the model to its rightful owner. The whole press release is about Heritage. It doesn't really acknowledge how they got hold of the model. Again, from the way that he's always done business, that's his business MO. He just focuses on, this came through my shop and I facilitated what happened next. However, there were some other things that came up during that I had never heard about before. Heritage, Magdalena, and Chanas defrauded co-plaintiffs out of the benefits of consignment agreement and bargained secret profits, which had monetary value, cheating Riach and potentially Rivas out of their prestige and possible breakout opportunities in acting careers. Yeah, acting careers. Interesting word. I wouldn't use the word acting. Doesn't really matter. What we're realizing is that Dustin is not only someone who goes looking for that golden ticket, he's someone that actually participates in a TV show where he talks about finding the golden ticket. And the legal requirements that were assigned to the release that Heritage wanted them to sign completely prohibited him not only from not being there, but you cannot legally discuss it with A&E. You can't tell anybody anything that you've been saying to us. It was to completely silence anything that he could use as PR. So, and then this is one here that I thought was interesting at the bottom. Chanas and Heritage declined Riach's request to attend the first of 2 content creation segments for Magdalena's reality show, claiming it was an authentication meeting and the title dispute could cause problems. Chanas was lying. Again, allegation from the meetings for Star Trek star-studded events with photo ops kicked it. This is something I think that was like, they shouldn't have done this, but we all saw it. I showed the video, and that is the gentleman from Otoy scanned the model and showed, hey, I can create this into 3D. Everybody knew that everybody knew the model was scanned. The issue is that they filmed the model when they didn't.
If you have any videos, photos, or documents that you would like to donate to us, please feel free to send them to Jim at trek-world.com or submit them via the web at submit.trek-world.com.
They didn't own it and they didn't have permission. And then to make matters even worse, the toy gentleman publishes it on social media. So that automatically contradicted Joseph's comments that were happening on the back end that no, there was no filming of anything done, period. There was no video footage of anything taken. It's like, well, it's funny you should say that because one of the guys you had there from Latoy, he posted a video clip of some of what he recorded. I think, in all honesty, that video clip, I think, is what actually kicked this whole amended complaint in motion. Because I think that's when the point that especially Dale, the lawyer, sit back and say, guys, there were all sorts of revenue opportunities here that you had or career opportunities that you had. And they didn't even tell you they did them. So I think that's what started this whole mess. But anyhow, let's go down on here. Just look for things. All right. I'm going to read this agreement of we're going to take the 500,000 in a minute. So I'm going to skip over some of this. I'm going to cover that in there. These highlights were done literally stream of consciousness thinking as I was reading through it the other night. So at the top of this one, I really want to hammer home here. Heritage had instructed the co-plaintiffs not to communicate with anyone and to furthermore withhold information needed to evaluate the valid claim. They were told point blank, don't talk to anybody. They were told, don't talk to me. Do not talk to anyone about this. You keep your mouth shut, and that's what we want. And they got emails to that, and it's actually even part of the agreement. I'm going to show you their legal exhibits at the end of this document. Okay, so there's when co-plaintiffs discovered and exposed the wrongdoing, Heritage Counsel was terminated as a fall guy for what Heritage's normal business practice. So I do want to point out that after the lawsuit was filed on May 7th and the brouhaha started, Heritage fired their legal team and put a new legal team in place. And I was aware of it, but I had nothing to put in front of the camera in my mouth that couldn't be backed up without a court document. So I didn't say anything. But it was one of the first things that happened in a situation like that when you're dealing with legal things. If immediately after this kind of thing, immediately after a lawsuit's published aimed at you that really put you in a bad light, it's very common. Get rid of them. We need new faces because the other guys, they're associated with us. And here's the beauty of it. A client-attorney privilege. The other guys aren't allowed to talk about it. So they're protected in both manners. Okay, so the original, we're going to first clause. Nope, let's go to the release. So this is how it all began. They had already signed an agreement up here. This is the agreement that was signed on November 2nd, the very day after, or 2 days after, obviously, Halloween night, when they put the model up on the internet and the world shook. They opened the very next morning and they signed this agreement, which says, hey, we're going to, and I realize this, let's see if I can zoom out just a little bit, although obviously I don't anticipate, anybody's going to be able to read it. I will highlight a couple things here. One right here, while in the auctioneer's possession, consigning properties are required to be fully insured. So the auctioneer may state the value of the consignor's properties for its insurance part of policy. Consignor estimates the value at $800,000. The insured value, see paragraph 7 of this agreement for important information regarding the issued value of properties. So this is another thing that was kind of interesting, and that was they negotiated a deal, Dustin and Jason, but it didn't stop them from saying, yes, we're going to do this. We're going to go ahead and make arrangements to give this back to Roddenberry. We will accept the $500,000 finder's fee, and we will, and you're going to see here, we agree to confidentiality. We agree to all of these things. We won't see you again. We're good. All of that was issued, and that's what we're looking at right now. But this part in here, I want to point out, in order for an agreement to be binding, you have to have certain things that are mentioned in the agreement get executed. So this agreement was signed, and it says, upon receipt of this signed agreement, Heritage will timely remit compensation of the property totaling $500,000 in a manner agreed by the parties. That never happened. They haven't seen a penny to this day. And supposedly Rod does not have the model either. It is still in Heritage's possession, according to statements they made on the previous complaint. In exchange for this, in exchange for giving them the money, the guys get the money, Rod gets the ship, and then Dustin and Jason relinquish, and forever disclaims all rights, title, and interest to the property. They covenant and agree that all right, title, and interest to the property has been extinguished and rendered nullity by the terms of this agreement. So all you had to do, Heritage auctioneers, was give them the check and take the model and give it to Rod, and everything would have been perfect. They changed the agreement without getting anybody's signature. And it gets even worse because I think it's this one. No, as I fade through this, and I know mutual right releases, covenant not to sue. This document said, hey, we won't sue. You won't sue. Everybody's going to be happy. They agreed to confidentiality and non-disparagement. In other words, we're not going to speak or say anything uncomfortable. No admissions or concessions of liability or fact. In other words, they agreed 100% to drop any concerns about who was really liable for what and what the facts were. We're just going to give you the model, you give us the money. And then further down here, there's a line in this right here. Acts necessary to institute agreement. And then in section L, right underneath it, amendments. This agreement shall not be amended except by writing signed by all parties. This is where things went off the rail because Dustin and Jason got this and they signed it. There's everybody's signature. It was a done deal. They were waiting. All we need to do now is just give me the money, and Rod gets that. But instead, a few days before the April 1st meeting, they get another release. And this release is really, really fishy. Okay. So the big differences with this is allegedly, and I backed this up with talking to the lawyer for the plaintiff side here. They wanted to change the agreement that you no longer give the model to Rod. You transfer the model's ownership to us. We'll then take care of getting it to Rod. And in that, when they sent this new agreement, they released information that they didn't mention before. One of which was they told Rod that they needed 600,000, not 5. They want to keep 100,000 to themselves. Now, this might actually be splitting hairs if it weren't for everything else that went wrong in this lawsuit. They stood to make $75,000 if the auction had sold for over $1 million. So, in negotiating a finder's fee for Heritage for REF, they agreed to go ahead and say, we're going to ask for an additional $25,000, and we want our cut to be 600,000, and then we will pay out the difference. And that had a lot to do with why they wanted it trained. They wanted it transferred to them and not to Rod, because then whatever agreement between Rod and Heritage happened, there was no legal pass-through to Dustin. And there were some surprising things in this release. So one of which was you got the 50%, or they're adding the 25,000 payment of the finder's fee. So when they introduced this one and they said, hey, this is going to be like 600,000, it was at that point that an email went out to Ryan Chanis and said, we told you we were not going to agree to this before you sent it. We have a signed agreement that everybody's in agreement to and been reviewed by legal on both sides. Send us the money and we're gone. They never got it. Instead, they got an email, came back and said, well, what we could do is we could make it so that we give you $100,000 fairly soon and the remaining $400,000 around the 6-month time period, which makes no sense to anybody, including me, as to why they would want to delay then getting that. But here's the other, and that is there's no longer, if this other release is agreed to, which it was not signed, then they no longer had any recourse. In other words, it literally, the new release categorized the finder's fee as a gratuity, which meant it didn't even really have to be paid. It was just a nicety that was promised, but is not legally enforceable. So at that point is when the crap really hit the fan. All of this happened before the April 1st meeting. All of this, everybody that was present in the building on April 1st that was a Heritage employee knew that this thing had already gone so far off the rails that it was going to end up in court. They never told any of our people that were there that day anything that was happening in the background. And then, of course, when they then released the press release that went out over Associated Press with, a beautiful picture of, Joe and Rod shaking hands and smiling over the model, everything they said, they knew was not the case now. The deal had not been agreed to. They had not returned it to the owner, even though they said they did. It was just a big mess. This is pretty much it in a nutshell. So what I want to do now is I'm going to shut up for a minute, drink something here, and give me a chance to let my other gentleman here that you recognize. We have Mike and we have Roger. And then, of course, we have David with us down in the bottom there, and give them a talk to collectively talk between you guys and the folks online. I'm going to be scrolling back through people's messages here and let's see if I can tackle any questions that have come up during the time that I was running my mouth for the last 35 minutes.
Well, it's no surprise, Jim, that this is stuck in litigation. Seeing what's actually in the documents, and especially the highlighted sections of the documents, it's no wonder to me it's stranded in litigation right now. Deals were made, then Heritage backs out of it and tries to rewrite, the agreements, and it sounds like a big cluster. And that's no wonder that it hit litigation as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree completely. And one of the things is that, I had to take jurisprudence being a practicing physician, and some of the stuff that here in Texas, if this is handed over to the Texas Attorney General, Heritage is in a boatload of trouble.
Yep.
I'm not a lawyer and I'm wearing a red shirt, so I'm in trouble already. But the Texas Deceptive Trade Practice Act specifically states that you're in trouble if you have false, misleading, or deceptive business practices, which include misrepresenting quantities, the source, sponsorship, approval, or certification of goods and services. So if they advertise this out before certification, they're even worse trouble than any of this. And this is a specific state code under Business and Commerce Code Chapter 17. So if this is filed in Texas and the Texas AG Attorney General takes this up, Heritage is probably going to be in a boatload of trouble. Yep. Because if they amended a document without co-signatures and, oh, by the way, adjusted on the original document, oh, brother, Heritage it's just like, you guys not only are in the Titanic, but they put 4 torpedoes in your hull at the same time.
I'm honestly surprised, David, that Heritage went that route. I really am. If they're as high profile as they appear to be, I'm surprised. It makes me wonder what's in their head to try and pull something like this. It really does. Other than greed, I don't know what's in their head to go that route and try and gum up the works by changing the agreements and stuff. So yeah, I'm shocked that they tried to pull something like that, honestly.
Yeah. One of the things is that, it's just like, this is, an inquiry, because the original lawyers team went, hey, whoa, can't do this.
Yep.
And hired a new one because they knew they had done something wrong. That's a supposition, so it's like, oops.
Real quick, because I want to address something that came up, 2 things, because Paul, God bless him, he identified something. He's eagle-eyed here as I was skimming through it, because I meant to say something about it. And that is that in this amended complaint, for the very first time, this discovery and this sale, it is that the family recognizes, even 60 years later, just how important Richard was. It is definitely ironic, considering the struggles that they had, that he had for the first 10 years after Star Trek, just to get anybody even acknowledge him. Now, I will point out the obvious here, though. Okay. Howard Anderson was the vendor on record for the Enterprises. They subcontracted to Richard, then subcontracted to the property shop that we see when the Enterprise is sitting in the street in front of the property shop and when it's delivered. So these have subcontractors within subcontractors. However, the architect that was making sure the blueprints were followed was Richard, both on the 11-foot model and on the 33-inch model. So I think that originally, early on, a lot of people didn't really want to recognize subcontractors or contractors, but that is the way business is done, even moderately, even today. The general contractor will usually farm out electrical and plumbing to somebody else. So Richard's DNA is all over this. And it's kind of sad that we had to wait 60 years to have that universally agreed that his DNA is everywhere. Because he certainly, all knew him well, obviously. And he was, in the beginning, from the stuff that Paul has shared with me, he was hurt and frustrated and mad, and I don't blame him.
Yep.
And when he reached out to the Smithsonian thinking, if anybody would be somebody who could help me, it would be them. And their response was to freeze him out also in the beginning. Paul, to this day, and all the stuff that I've read, you can thank Paul Newitt. Well, he's online, guys. You can all type thank you. You should be doing this. He's the reason Richard Dayton has been recognized. Other people did other things. The daughter did other things. A bunch of people did other things. Paul was able to talk to the people that made the difference. And all too often, that kind of assistance on the back end is very rare to come by. especially since most people today are really hesitant to talk to a name that has already been previously in print with anything. Yeah, so there's that part there. I also, several people asked, by the way, about the toy films. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe we'll do a live stream in the future. I had not planned on doing a creative on the toy films because they fascinate me, but they are, in my opinion, an incomplete product right now. And I don't really think we even know exactly where they're going with it. As we know, we've seen vignette that they've edited and mastered together. And the magic they were able to do with Sam to make him look like Bill was astounding. But we've seen so little, and Otoy has not announced what they're doing all of this for. I mean, obviously, we're interested in being able to potentially recreate. We saw, Spock and Savag's son in the one clip or whatever, but they haven't really said what it is. So at this point, for me, it's an incredible photorealistic, mind-blowing optical effect, but just like the guys who make, like Tobias Richter, who made the one animated Enterprise flyby for me a couple of years ago for the channel, as you may remember from way back when, extraordinarily talented, and even has his own backstory about Star Trek, but it's a backstory and I can't really add anything of value to it. So that's why I haven't really spoken too much about the Otoys. Hadn't really intended to speak about them at all, but when I saw somebody ask me, I couldn't ignore it. All right, I'm going to go searching for more comment.
One question I have is, one thing it's not clear to me is why Texas law is involved here. All the participants here all seem to be California-based. So where does Texas law come into play?
I think that it's Heritage that actually has offices, probably from old profiles in history days. It's in
Also Heritage has some of the larger auctions out of Dallas. So it may be that they handled a large portion of the auction or the Heritage Fine Art Division out of Dallas. And so automatically, if it's handled in any way as a business deal through Dallas, then Texas would be involved in.
I think if I'm not mistaken, Jim, I think when we went through the court documents and originally the first time, I think there was something mentioned in there about Dallas or about Texas.
I know the team is based out of Dallas.
Yeah,
that was, because those laws that said, we can't, this is wrong. And, you can do it, but we can't be involved. So, which is when they, that Heritage said, okay, well, what if we had one of your paralegals, the plaintiffs or to the sellers, and as a representative of the legal team, and then you could brief her on what to say and how to answer questions they give. Would that satisfy the letter of the law? It's like, well, yeah, it satisfies the letter of the law. And I think that if it hadn't gone south, probably might not even be something that isn't done often.
Right.
It's just when it turned out when it went south as quickly and as badly as it did, the first heads to roll, unfortunately, were the guys that, in all honesty, if they'd had it their way, they would have done this, period, because it would run their ethical requirements as a lawyer.
That's unfortunately, Jim, that's kind of the way it goes with legal cases, though. I mean, how many times have we seen where plaintiffs or, defendants, they don't follow their lawyer's advice and they do what they think is right or what they want to do anyway, and so that tends to get them in trouble in the long run.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that here for sure.
I do want to point out something, because this is kind of weird for me. Anyhow, the event has exposed a schism between the people like the guy who bought the phaser and the communicator from the Julian's auction, which including all the fees and stuff with probably, $2 million, 1.8 something in there. It put a schism between the very wealthy private collectors and our Star Trek community that would be talked to for authentication.
Right.
Because I have been contacted now by two other people over potential things that may go wrong, that have gone wrong, and they may or may not do something about it. But they both echoed the same thing. I reached out to you because I saw these videos you did on the lawsuit, and also that the format of when these are done for the most part is interactive, in that the whole idea is, well, quite often we need to know something, like, we're trying to track down who Rosa Jennings was. And I haven't forgotten about the drama of the families. It just doesn't really had no impact on the actual physical location of the model as it went along, because there is still some freaky stuff going on over, but Rosa Jennings and the folks whose father actually owned the storage unit. But these collectors now do not trust a Star Trek website. I think I thought I shaped his name is, I don't remember. And I'm so sorry if you're watching this. Please do not take my name issues with any sincerity. I just am really bad at popping names out instantly.
Hi, I was watching your untold story of the Klingon D7. I found it nice, light, and fun. I prefer your type of broadcast versus those that disparage the series, talking about how bad the special effects were and so forth. I don't like those type of videos. I like the ones that celebrate the idea behind Star Trek, the original series, one of the most successful sci-fi franchises in history. And I like the celebration of optimism that the series puts forward. And I found your broadcast informative and nice. My name is Richard Bennett. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Instantly when I'm live like this. When I do my videos, I look like I can, like the gift of gab. Well, it's amazing what you can hide with editing. But anyhow, he was the one that the family that owned the two props reached out to, and he did the restoration. And he put up a couple videos on YouTube, and he talked about it. You got to his website, he's got all that information out there. But the gods that be are the guys, which not all of them do we know their identity, although we know a couple of them, but they're the brain trust behind the herocom.com website. There's a website out there. If you haven't seen it, it is Nirvana for communicator information. Everything you wanted to know about all 10 of the models that were produced. Detailed analysis. The Alpha communicator that was the first one found of the two hero communicators. I would still take anything that I find on their website as far more gospel than I would see somewhere else. If you go to their website about Beta, which is the second one, they keep a pretty firm, neutral message until about 2 or 3 lines into it. And then there's even an open letter to the person who bought Beta, where they do a complete hatchet job on this guy. That, the way it was restored was terrible. It's not acceptable. Shouldn't have been done. I mean, they give a laundry list of all the things they said he did wrong. Who heard that before? Ed Mariecki, by any chance? And I know I screwed that last name up. You all know Ed. Okay. People who do their best get criticized by people who have no idea what they're talking about. People do know what they're talking about. I am not in any way whatsoever trying to degrade their reputation. Okay. But their behavior, there was no reason for that entire argument to be on their website. None whatsoever. What they literally wanted to do was discredit him, say this was all botched. It needs to be done this way. And they actually even say, and this is the interesting part, if you're interested in this, guys, you do not have long to see it. They're going to take it down at the end of the month because they said they were only going to leave it up for December. There's an open letter from another person who I think might be the guy who originally started all of this saying, I can restore it for you. Here's everything I can restore. Here's everything they did wrong. Reach out to me. And then the hero.com website says, we are just a mediator. We are not, nobody's anything you do. We want nothing else. We're just a mediator. Well, that also means what you just did was you accepted an advertisement on your website. And in doing so, you discredited the man who actually did the work. Yeah. And we know what happens when it happens. Those people disappear. He might even listen to this. I'm pretty sure he probably will be. I'm going to try to reach out to him because especially if he ends up being somebody who's going to be ostracized over this whole thing, which is ridiculous in my opinion. I do want to get to know him because he is a valid source of information far beyond what I did. These people at HeroCom and this gentleman, they've been in this for decades. They are modelers that just grew up with it. It's in their DNA. I'm a researcher. I've been back into it. The site just passed 4 years. Prior to that, I was busy being dad and a career person. So there's this whole huge backlog of time that I didn't experience, but more importantly, I didn't gain experience and expertise in, which is why I always want to go back and talk to somebody who was there, somebody like a Paul or somebody like a Susan Sackett, to talk to somebody who was there in as clear terms as I can to get information from them before they disappear on us, because I don't have that encyclopedia of knowledge. Although it looks pretty good sometimes in these videos, I don't have that recall that these folks have. Right. And so whenever I see them turn on each other, it's just sad. He said nothing. He hasn't acknowledged it. He given no indication that he even read the letter or read what was posted on the website. But I know this, every prop person in the entire world that is involved with Star Trek has seen that website and seen that page in the past month, because that's the de facto person. And then I am really looking like you guys talk more about this. Bill, if you're on here, thank you very much. Bill is another person I want to point out. Bill reached out to me 2 years ago. I got interested in how the original effects were replaced with CGI effects. Some of you may remember I did like 3 videos on it way back when, and I was just fascinated with it. And Bill had done the exact same thing. Now, he had done it a little bit differently than the approach I was taking. He did it episode by episode. And as a result, he had cross-references. This shot was used in all these episodes or whatever. Whereas I was just saying shot for shot. I was going to the product libraries of them. And he came out to me and he was kind enough to give me a spreadsheet and clips. He had actually isolated the clips of the original FX on every one of the episodes before the CGI was done. And he very generously said, here, you're looking at the same thing. And yes, and I was even looking at his web on trekplace.com. I was looking at his trying to do a Rosetta Stone on what he had. He had no reason to reach out, but thank you very much, Bill. I'm glad that you did. Please don't be a stranger, but I really, really wanted to point out that, this is the first time I've actually seen him in a while on here. And I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge him, because there's a lot of people that do reach out to me, as I hate to say it, that for whatever reason, the conversation never comes up again. And it's been a while since I've even seen Bill's name or thought about it. So thank you for joining us, Bill. There are no other questions that I see right now.
Well, it doesn't.
One quick comment I wanted to make. Scanning through that document, it looked like the court date was scheduled for sometime in late August.
Yes, August 5th of 2025, I think. But it's August 2025. And it did get pushed. It was originally expected to be at some point by the end of this year. But depositions and everything's just stretched out.
Right. So unless, the parties come to some sort of agreement or whatever, it looks like this thing is going to be dragging out for quite a while.
I have 2 things to say about that right now. One is the only person who hasn't spoken publicly about this since day one is Rod. He posted about it, back in November or whatever, when it was still in the process of, I think this is neat. Ownership hadn't come up as an issue at that point. But yeah, he said a few things in the beginning. And of course, he was there at the press release and all the photographs that went out of Associated Press. He hasn't said a word since then. And I find that to be fascinating, if I may borrow a word from our friend. That is odd for someone to be off the record and quiet after such a public explosion followed the press. And the second thing, watch this channel. I can't discuss what's coming up next, but there are things coming up next that show that we are getting what could be an acceptable solution. Because let's face it, guys, if this thing goes to jury, which is a jury trial, if it goes to jury, Heritage can't let it go to jury. Period. They just simply can't.
Heritage is screwed if they let it go to jury.
Yeah, because they have no control over the upper limit that would be chosen in punitive damages. No, granted, they'd appeal, and then Dustin and Jason would appeal, and they'd appeal again. And my guess is it would not go to the Supreme Court, but it might go to the state Supreme Court. And then, of course, there would probably be, like somebody said, like David said about, well, to the best of my knowledge right now, they haven't filed anything in Texas, but it's obviously got Texas stamped all over it as a next logical step.
Yep.
This thing needs to be settled, and it needs to go away, because that way, we already saw the releases. Don't talk about it. Don't disparage. Take the money and run. That's how these things work. And that's the quickest and fastest way. Because one of the things that's going to hurt Heritage, whether they win or lose, the publicity is going to be damning. I think, but I don't know for certain, but does anybody find it odd that the first major Star Trek auction since this happened went to Julian's instead of Heritage?
And that's probably going to happen in the future, because that level of trust is not going to has been eroded now by this whole issue, and this whole case has eroded the trust of people in Heritage and what they stand for. But again, they can't let it go to a jury trial. I mean, they're screwed if it does.
Yeah. So
it's just a big shame, because who are the losers in all of this? 1, the finders. 2, Roddenberry. But the biggest one is the Star Trek community in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Because everybody who has a love of Star Trek and everything Star Trek and the ideals that it represented are being drugged through this mess, principally because of an auction house. And it's like, yeah.
You're right. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but it's the exact same thing that happened with Alec Peters. And, and then out comes, Strange New World. They had launched phase 2. And then, Star Trek Continues, Exeter, all of these fan things are going on. And they didn't threaten in any way, shape, or form as far as revenue is concerned. Alec found a way to produce a television quality movie with television stars and the people behind the camera. So cinematography. He found a way to do the same thing that Dick did when he's crowdsourcing to fund Star Trek Continues. I said, well, we'll just go ahead and we're going to fund this. They did Taylor Dack that they released, 20-minute film. Amazing. When I saw it, I was like, I'll be damned. This could work. They took in $1.5 million, which is mind blowing. And Paramount took notice because now you're not asking to be a fan film. You're asking to spend, $1 million+ on independent film using core IP and cutting us out of a license deal. And it started a brawl that didn't last very long. I have no idea why anybody associated with them thought they could win that lawsuit. They obviously couldn't. They went down pretty darn quick. It is kind of funny that it was still up and being argued when J.J. Abrams announced Star Trek in 2009. And J.J. Abrams at a Comic-Con actually said something along the lines of, this is going to be settled right now. And it did, but it did not get settled the way that it had been intimated it was going to be settled. It was discussed in Comic-Con as if we will clear this up for being just ridiculous and don't get in the way of the fans. But when they escalated it, which I'm sure they did, Paramount just simply said, fine, we're coming down hard and we're doing it right now. I'm pretty sure they placed an injunction. And once that was started, there's no recovery. So we've run across, unfortunately, people who do something that impacts the fan community anecdotally. We were never in their crosshairs. I guarantee you, not a single person from Alec's group or anybody else ever thought, oh, the thing to do here is to set myself up as a monopoly and freeze out the other guys so you only look at my stuff. Never crossed his mind. You do art for art's sake. And, and like Icarus, sometimes you fly a bit too close to the sun. And we are paying for it, Dave. There's so much we want to know about that model. There's so many questions that still need to be answered. How did it get broke? Well, it was in that storage compartment. We know that the storage container had it in since the mid-1985 or whatever. The Pine Sol smear, which wasn't Pine Sol because it was present on the model on the day one photographs I've got sitting right outside the storage unit. Where did it come from? Somebody obviously tried to clean it. The nacelles are hideous. They're like epoxy back in place with severe banding, I guess, or whatever you call it. There's a whole bunch of history there. And we're being denied it at this point. And they're making it almost 100% certain that the person who ends up with this, if there's a dollar amount attached to it, is going to be like one of these private collector friends that have been calling me. They have all of this stuff in their private collections with no intention to sell them, which is fun. They're collecting them as fine art, and it's an investment. Their kids are going to inherit it. It's a financial investment. No intention to sell. But once you do that, it disappears from the public sight. You have no idea. Yep. You just vanishes like it never existed.
Yep. Well, I think that's why so many people have mentioned or have commented about the 3-foot model should be given to the Smithsonian. It should reside in the Smithsonian along with the 11-foot model. And I agree with that, because at least there it's going to be in a climate-controlled environment. It won't deteriorate anymore. Whether they choose to restore it or not is something else. But at least it wouldn't deteriorate any further. Plus, it's there for everybody to see. If you want to go see it, you can go to the Smithsonian and see it. So that's the biggest thing. I think it's like the Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he's not buried in somebody's closet or in a case and display case in somebody's house where nobody's going to see it. But again, it's going to depend on who's got the money, how much money they have, and whether they have whether they're going to buy it and then give it to the Smithsonian, or whether they're just going to lock it away in a case in their house.
Well, yeah, because I think, you can always, say, displayed in the museum, owned by.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And give credit to where credit's due. But, it's such a shame that we're losing some of these. I mean, like the motion picture enterprise is out fading in sunlight. And I think that needs a good restoration. And I can't begrudge, the purchase of it, but, to see it fading away.
Absolutely.
I mean,
right.
One of these collector friends that's reached out to me recently, been sending me pictures and videos of his home. And his home is like a finely crafted museum, curated museum. There's spotlights, there's accent lighting on everything he's got. It's amazing that, that for him, it's the composition of the way the entire room looks and stuff. I know this gentleman would not ever do something like leave something like that in direct sunlight. They know better than to do that. And Bezos probably knows as well, but it's not him. I mean, he bought it and said, hey, this is where I want it. They did that. But, I'm sure that there's somebody, in the corporate office said, well, put it over here. That way all the visitors can see it when they come in, but it's not going to block the way or cause any issues with any publicity, and people coming in X number of reasons that ends up with being stuck in a bad place. Anyone who's ever worked for any corporate office will tell you that where things end up being sat is always not the best place for them. It's like I hate that, sorry guys, the keyboard, the keys on the QWERTY layout. They were not designed so that you could type fast. They were designed to specifically slow you down, because the old typewriters, if you remember them all, they had little heads with a hammer, and I'm sure we all ran across it with the Smith and Remington or whatever, where you had two of them at the same time, and they had to pull them apart. So I think the Dvorak keyboard does much better at that. But QWERTY was designed because they wanted to make sure that people spent less time correcting the keys things. So you choose things for business reasons that are business reasons, and they don't really apply to any other criteria that you would try to use against them.
Right. Too, when you stop and think about the option of putting it in a display case in your home or having it donated to the Smithsonian, like David said, with acknowledgement to the owner, you stop and think about it. What's safer? Where's a safer place for it to be than the Smithsonian? Nowhere. They not only do they have climate controlled environments, but they have security much better than what you're going to find in anybody's house. And if you have it, that's the reason that private collectors don't display. They have displays in their home, but they don't invite people to see them, because guess what? If somebody knows it's there, there's a good chance somebody's probably going to try and steal it at some point.
Exactly what happened the night they took the model off the internet.
Yeah.
Jason and Dustin, it became a shell game, because suddenly people knew where the model was that night, and there were more than one. But the issue is, discovering that you have a priceless artifact on your property at the same time the rest of the world finds out is the absolutely worst time to have that happen.
Yep.
And get out of there.
Even if you have a home security system, it's not anywhere near adequate for something like this. Whereas the Smithsonian,
that's Mission Impossible style of break.
Exactly.
Rehab's going to stop them.
It's like National Treasure stuff. When you see, the heat sensors, and they have this and they have that. It's no safer place for it than the Smithsonian. So, like David said, if a collector wants to purchase it and then, display it, I think that's a great win-win for everybody, because then the public can see it. It's in a secure area. It's in a secure place and a climate controlled place. But yet, if this collector does not want to relinquish, ownership of it, then it's, they're recognized for it, but yet it's someplace where it can be displayed and the public can see it. So that's my 2 cents worth.
I think we've covered pretty much everything that we wanted to cover in this. I want to go ahead and get ready to roll this off for my patrons that are on. To everybody else, please have a wonderful rest of the holiday season. We will see you again on the other side, obviously, of New Year's. So thank you, folks, for joining. Have a wonderful time, and we will be in touch. All right.
Happy New Year, everybody.
So now let's get up with the fun stuff, like this right over here.